Today, we're doing a deep dive on how the US has turned up the heat so high on Cuba that it's literally an inferno at this point. The entire island is living through a full-blown blackout nightmare right now as the energy blockade continues. In the past few days, Cuba flat out told every international airline they can't refuel at their airports for the next month because jet fuel is basically non-existent. Blackouts are hitting 12 to 20 hours a day. Gas stations are dry with 5-gallon limits for civilians, and the government is slashing office hours and bus service just to keep the lights on for the bare essentials. The crisis really exploded after the U.S. captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, scooping him up in his undies with Delta Force gracefully escorting him out of his palace back in January. And the imposed naval blockade that was originally on Venezuela is now cutting off Cuba's main oil lifeline. No significant shipments have arrived since late December, and threats of tariffs on any replacement suppliers have sealed the entire deal. Russia is calling it economic strangulation at this point, and they're promising more support. How will that support come? Will it be an airlift from Russia? Likely not. Will it be ships coming in? Well, there's a full blockade. So Russia might just be giving that rhetoric because they've got close ties with Cuba. Because if you remember back to the Maduro days, Maduro, Cuba, and Russia, they all teamed up for that soft fentanyl war against the United States, that very strategic war. So obviously some deep ties in there, with Cuba buying a lot of products from Russia. Cuba getting that sweet Venezuelan crude that needed to be refined by Russia. So as you can see, it's a big circle sharing situation. Yeah, circle sharing. That's the best way to put it. China is said to also be sending aid packages, and this is all happening 90 miles from Florida with major ripple effects on commercial aviation for Cuba and cash flow to the actual Cuban regime itself. Stay to the end of this video because I'll break down Cuba's actual military capabilities, what they might realistically try against the United States, and we'll run through one very plausible hypothetical of how a flare-up could unfold at sea. This is high-stakes stuff right now, right off the coast of Florida with real strategic weight. So we're going to talk about the military capabilities, and did you know Cuba actually has an air force? Yeah, they've got MiGs. So right now, obviously the regime is going to pull back a lot of that gas from their civilian infrastructure to make sure that they can keep their jets flying. And we're going to get into all of that. This is a full throttle, full-on blockade that is meant to crush the regime of Cuba. And we're going to get into why this strategic move might be doing the job. So Cuba's in full defensive mode, and they're leaning hard on their long-standing, what's called War of the Entire People doctrine. That's literally what they call it. The regime under President Miguel Diaz-Canel has ramped up mobilization, conducting tactical exercises with regular forces, territorial troop militias, and production and defense brigades. Again, War of the Entire People. He's focused on making sure everybody in his population can go fight for him and protect his regime is basically what that means. They're framing this entire energy blockade as existential U.S. aggression, aimed at regime change and preparing civilians for prolonged resistance. That's their goal. Basically to turn their entire country into a militia should some sort of an invasion happen. They look at it like, well, if the entire country is the military, then there's more of a chance of the regime staying in power. But the energy crisis is crushing daily life for the people of Cuba. Fuel rationing is severe. Reduced public transport, shortened work, and school hours. A lot of the kids probably don't mind that, but obviously a situation where the entire population is being pressured at this point. Rolling blackouts that can last 20 hours. Families burning wood or coal for cooking. Hospitals are struggling with power outages and supply shortages. The most visible hit came on February 9th when Cuban authorities issued that NOTAM warning that jet aviation fuel would no longer be available at the island's 9 international airports, including Havana's José Martí from February 10th through at least March 11th. Air Canada, WestJet, and Transat and others immediately suspended their flights, crippling the tourism industry obviously. But the tourism industry was basically propping up this dictator who was enacting a soft fentanyl war on the United States and had multiple guards protecting Maduro. Very interesting that all of the guards that were protecting Maduro were Cuban. It's almost like Maduro didn't trust his own people, and he actually trusted Cuba more. I wonder why. It's almost like Cuba and Venezuela were in bed together. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. Long-haul carriers from Europe, Russia, and Asia are now facing expensive detours or cancellations, and Russia is very active in the Caribbean. When it comes to owning property, Russia is big in this region. I mean, maybe they just want to escape the frozen tundra, but they are massive in the Dominican Republic. So maybe this is just Mother Russia South, Mother Russia Sunshine, and that's why all the Russians like being in this region just to escape that brutal cold. But on the military side, Cuba's conventional forces are relatively limited. But the whole plan is built for asymmetric pain, going up against any adversary that would want to take down the actual dictator himself. Active duty is around 45 to 50,000, but they can call on over 1 million paramilitary members and reserves under the War of the Entire People concept. That's their whole goal. It's designed to make any invasion or sustained operation extremely costly through, as you could guess, guerrilla tactics, urban fighting, and total societal mobilization. That's their main goal. Asymmetric warfare, hybrid warfare, take on anybody who comes in, and the ultimate goal is to protect the regime. In the air, they have only a handful of operational fighters, roughly 3 to 5 MiG-29s, which are their most capable, maybe 10 MiG-21s, with low readiness rates due to part shortages and age. These could be used for quick coastal intercepts or propaganda harassment sorties, to force the US to expend expensive missiles to take them down, or just to troll. Basically, be like, yeah, our Air Force is out there doing great things like what we saw the Maduro Air Force do, trying to go up there and just thump their chest. Yeah, we're strong. We looked strong by the pool. But really, I mean, it's basically a paper tiger. Their air defenses include modernized S-125 Pura 2BM SAMs. Some have been mounted on T-55 tank chassis plus older systems, and man-pads is their biggest thing. Again, guerrilla warfare, man-pads, integrate all that into the actual population. That's their goal. And then at sea, the Navy they have is a coastal-focused force, fast attack boats, patrol craft, and anti-ship missile batteries. Where have we seen this before? It's almost like they took something out of Iran's playbook. You know, they're sitting there at their Dr. Evil meeting and Cuba's like, hey, Iran, can we borrow a few of your fast boats? But Cuba also has special forces, and one of those outfits is called the Elite Black Wasps, or the Avispas Negras if you're in Cuba. They're trained for infiltration, sabotage, and asymmetric strikes. What might Cuba actually try against the US? They know they can't win a conventional fight, so I would expect swarm tactics, dozens of small fast boats, or even low-flying drones. Them getting those drones from Russia, China, Iran, the usual suspects. It's probably at the top of their list right now. Even commercial-grade quadcopters that are adapted for one-way attacks like what we've seen used in the Russian-Ukraine war, launched from shore or fishing vessels to saturate U.S. patrols in the Florida Straits. Coastal missile batteries could target approaching ships. If things escalate to landings, they'd shift to prolonged guerrilla resistance. Militias ambushing supply lines, urban snipers in Havana, IEDs, and using the population as human shields to drive up political costs and make it too politically costly if they can. That'd be their number one goal. They might also weaponize migration, encouraging mass boat lifts towards Florida to overwhelm U.S. borders, or attempt cyber and disinformation campaigns. The goal here isn't necessarily victory. It's raising the price high enough that Washington faces domestic and international blowback. But in the Caribbean, scenarios like this, there's already U.S. power and infrastructure in the region with a supercarrier still in the region. Carrier-based jets, F-18s, are still there for deterrence. They're there to also be deterrence against Russian or Chinese flights coming in, basically intercepting and making those flights turn around, having those F-18s right there off the carrier, and then having Roosevelt Roads and Puerto Rico where other aircraft can be based, F-15, F-16s. I would see this now as more of a fourth generation problem instead of having the F-35s or F-22s there, because at this point the F-35s and F-22s are a little bit overkill when it comes to the different defenses that Cuba has. And one of the bigger things would be MQ-9 Reaper drones. So launching those MQ-9 Reaper drones doing persistent ISR intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance and seeing exactly what Cuba is up to. But it looks like the full pressure plate is being put up against the Cuban regime. because it's clear that their number one goal is just to incite chaos into the United States. Like Washington is like, okay, you're going to try to incite chaos in the United States. You're responsible for thousands of fentanyl deaths. Well, all right, we're basically going to starve your regime out. And they were already starving their own people before. So the regime is going to say the humanitarian angle. But when it comes to these regimes like this, their number one focus is regime survival. So the main part of the treasure that comes into the country, the supplies, they all flow through the regime first, and then the scraps get sent to the people. And not just the carrier itself, but those destroyers, those Aegis combat systems, they're right there and ready should any of those MiG-29s get a little bit too handsy. But you got to think about the asymmetric warfare part of this. So for the close-in fight, if Cuba can get their hands on hundreds of these Iranian drones, they're going to use them. So think about the Sea Whiz on the ship, that close-in weapon system that just gives me tingles in places I didn't know I had every time I see it light up. 20mm, 4,500 rounds per minute to shred incoming boats, drones, or even missiles in the final seconds. And you've got the E-2D Hawkeye there up above doing persistent ISR around the island itself, and then queuing in any assets that it needs from across the fleet. Growlers are there as well. Electronic attack aircraft. Those might come in handy to disrupt any Cuban missile guidance or drone links. Many of these systems feature fire and forget modes again, where you can fire against multiple drones. The MQ-9 Reaper can stay on station and execute strikes if communications are jammed. That's going to be one of the main focuses, is having that MQ-9 there ready to go. And don't sleep on the RQ-170, that very advanced drone that can be up there collecting information, basically looking into the actual windows of the regime itself. As the Cuban president is sitting there complaining about his wife to his girlfriend, she's so demanding. There's energy blockade. He's keeping me from driving my Bentley. And I'm a little bit stressed out. His girlfriend's like, yeah, there, honey, there. And then he's like, yeah. And my wife's got this massive honey to-do list. Doesn't she know I'm pressured right now? But let's step to a section I like to call 4D chess, because this is textbook maneuvering right now that we're seeing. This energy blockade is massive. The blockade could trigger proxy moves. Russia could try to run tankers through or get their escorts. They've tried that before with trying to escort some of these oil ships with a nuclear submarine. That didn't really work out too well. It didn't really do anything at all. But China could ramp up diplomatic pressure and economic aid. I say economic aid. China's like, yeah, no, we're just bringing in bread. Yeah, no. This bread maker just looks like an advanced surface-to-air radar. Don't worry about that. It cooks the bread from 100 miles away. This is new advanced bread-making technology. So China could try to do that, and then that would make any move to go in and strike down the IADS, the Integrated Air Defense Systems. And if eventually its energy blockade leads to a full collapse in Havana, that could trigger massive migration waves towards Florida or chaotic internal power struggles that destabilize the region. And that's one of the main things. Think about this inner circle around the Cuban president. These aren't exactly the people that you would want to date your daughter or your son. These are the people that you would probably want to keep at an arm's distance. And now they're being strangled as well from their monthly income. So the destabilization could come from within. When it comes to that inner circle, actually understanding that, all right, us working against the United States, the president going up against and only teaming up with China and Russia, when we're literally right across the doorstep of the United States. Maybe there's a better option for us. And who knows, that could actually bring down the regime itself. But that remains to be seen. And again, these circles are extremely tight, as well as we saw the Cuban guards protecting Maduro, 32 of them being killed in the actual raid that went in and took out Maduro. So again, these guards aren't slouches. These special forces from Cuba aren't slouches. But as we have seen, as history has shown, they do not want to go up against U.S. Special Forces. That's just obvious. But inside Cuba, the regime is using the external threat of the U.S. as the big bad U.S. to try to rally support and suppress dissent for now. But the longer the squeeze continues, the harder it becomes for the actual regime itself to keep control of their people, in my opinion. So let's move to a hypothetical situation should things go kinetic in this region, with Cuba being on the chopping block and the Cuban people actually wanting a change as well. So at this point, the E-2D Hawkeye would pick up the first signs. A dozen fast attack boats would be screaming from the coastal bases in Cuba, some of them armed with anti-H-ship missiles, plus a wave of small drones approaching low and fast. One of Cuba's remaining MiG-29s also scrambles to try to create some sort of top cover. The Growlers immediately start to jam that MiG-29 and the drones, and then a two-ship of F-18 Strykers go up against that MiG-29. They launch A-120 AM rams, splashing the MiG-29 pretty much right away. But there's backup. There's going to be more of those blasting off and launching, because at this point, Cuba realizes that there's nothing to lose. So the Growlers focused immediately on the MiG-29 and then focus on the drones themselves, because in fighter aviation, you focus on the nearest, hottest threat. That means the closest and the fastest, and who's pointed at you, basically. So that would be the MiG-29s. So the Growlers would be jamming the MiG-29s and pumping information to F-18E and Fs, which would have AM rams to launch against those MiG-29s. And then the Growler would begin to jam the actual drone swarm itself. And then it would come down to, how do you take on that boat swarm that would be going up trying to take down the super carrier? Well, a big part of that would be the F-18s actually strafing these boats. If there's 20 boats, you've got an 8-ship of F-18s. That's basically a party for the F-18. Divide up the different sections of the ocean, and you just go to town trying to strike them down with that 20mm. So at this point, it would be a full-blown war in the region. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll keep you posted as the situation develops. Just a wild scenario with the president calling for war of the entire people in Cuba. So, we'll see what happens as this plays out. I'll see you guys on the next video. Go ahead and follow me on X, follow me on Instagram, click this next video that pops up right here. That'd be great. And then you can pop over to the Max Ready Room channel memberships if you want to see me do a live once a week. Thanks so much for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing